Jack Dorsey, who's co-founder of Twitter, has said, everyone has an idea, but it's really about executing the idea and attracting other people to help you with that idea. And so with those words in mind, I'm delighted to see so many people here tonight to celebrate the formal launch of ADRODR International. I'm also pleased to welcome those who join us from around the world and who are linking in through Facebook and YouTube. My name is Nicola Wallace. I'm a barrister and mediator here in London, and it's my great pleasure tonight to host this evening, where we have eminent speakers who will be adding to the debate of what is the future of mediation. But to start our evening, may I first invite you to give a very warm welcome to Charlotte Wanandea, who's Director of the Bar Professional Training course here in London at the BPP, who would like to say a few words.
Thank you everybody for coming here this evening. BPP is honoured to host the launch of ADRODR International, and what better week for its launch than Mediation Awareness Week. BPP is playing its part in mediation awareness in that we are dedicated and enthusiastic about training our students, Bar Professional Training course students and LPC legal practice students in mediation and ADR in general. We have a very long-standing relationship with Rahim, who is the Chief Executive of ADRODR International, and he was a former colleague of ours, so what better place for the launch than here, and we're dedicated to supporting him in this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlotte. It seemed only both right and proper that before we invite our speakers to the floor, that we hear from the founder of ADRODR International, Rahim Shamji. Rahim was called to the bar in 2000. He trained as a mediator in 2005, whilst also teaching here at the BPP on what was then the bar vocational course. Rahim designed and delivered the first ADR course for BP students, and this eventually became part of the resolution of disputes out of court module, which is taught here, called REDOC. In 2011, Rahim was appointed Global Director of Education and Training at ADR Group. Rahim has mediated and trained mediators in over 26 countries. He is currently the President-elect of the International Academy of Dispute Resolution, which is based in Chicago, and is a regular speaker both in the UK and on the international ADR platform. He is currently heavily involved with the development and promotion of online dispute resolution. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming the Chief Executive of ADRODR International, Rahim Shamji.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Charlotte, for a very warm welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome so many familiar faces and friends and colleagues to this evening's launch. To all those watching online, good evening or good morning, wherever you are. First of all, to say a few words about BPP Law School and their support and wonderful venue for tonight. And a special thank you to Charlotte for being so supportive in arranging for these facilities. I want to say a big thank you to the Mediation Awareness Week team for their support, which I'm sure you'll agree is a great initiative for the whole week of having 20+ events discussing and promoting mediation. I want to congratulate all of those with Mediation Awareness Week and for kindly letting us be part of this auspicious week. Many of you are joining us who live in and around London and the southeast from afar as well, but we have special guests, of course, from Greece and Cyprus as well. Zoe and Anna have come in especially, so thank you for that. We have two exceptional speakers this evening, and you're here to hear them. But I will take a few minutes of your time just to discuss and share with you the vision of ADRODR International. ADRODR International is not a traditional ADR provider. As the title suggests, we're going to focus on bridging the gap between face-to-face ADR and online in-person ADR. digital disruption is here and the ADR world is not exempt. Just as digital disruption has caused Uber to be the largest taxi company in the world and Airbnb to be the largest hotel company in the world, digitalization has arrived in the dispute resolution world, and ADR International aims to become a thought leader in this field. Just a few weeks ago, Lord Justice Briggs' report into the future of civil courts stated, and I quote, "practically inevitable that technology will play a key role in administrating civil justice." One of the recommendations is the creation of an online court to deal with claims of £25,000 or below. This will change the landscape of dispute resolution. We are governed by the 3 Ps. Progressive. That's our attitude. We're going to be modern, outward-looking organization that can move with agility for the changes of tomorrow. Progress. We want that for everyone. And progression. We want to help you reach your goal. ADRODR International is committed to creating dialogue in conflict-torn areas, and we've established connections in Europe, Asia, and Africa. We understand that not all conflict can be resolved in a formal setting, and therefore tonight we also launched the Center for Poetry and Conflict Resolution, CPCR, which will use the power of the written word and poetry to bring peace to conflicting parties, and I will share more information about this a bit later. Can I ask those standing if they want to come and take a seat, because I'm going to be a few minutes. So, to our services and products that we're going to offer, and I'm only going to share with you 3 or 4 of those this evening. First of all, we have the cadre, or the ADR experts. These are global leaders in their respective specialisms who are ready to give clients expert advice on any area of conflict and dispute resolution. As you'll see from the pictures and the titles, this is a formidable accompaniment of the cadre from politicians, former politicians, academics, former judges, industry experts and lawyers, all who represent the best talent in the world of ADR and conflict. We have the hubs. These are a one-stop shop for our civil, commercial, workplace and family ADR services. From training as a dispute professional, mediator or arbitrator, to selecting a professional for a dispute, to creating best practice and knowledge in these areas, these will become the one-stop shop. I have great pleasure in introducing you to the principals of the hub. I will look after the civil commercial hub, but we're also joined by Pamela Whitehead. Pam has an incredible track record in the world of conflict management in the workplace and was previously head of HR at a leading global financial institution. Cressida, who looks after the family ADR section, brings a pragmatic and exciting new look at the world of family ADR. Cress is formerly at the bar and is now one of the leading family mediators in the UK and internationally. She sat on the FMC for a member organisation and was instrumental in the working group to develop the mediation development. We also want to create an organisation with a social conscience. The Department for Dialogue and Pluralism is designed to create more peace in more peace attitude in a world torn by dogmas and stereotypes. All our activities must have a compound impact on society, whether it's the corporate world, families, or in war-torn countries. We only need to read the papers and watch the news and realize much of the conflict in the world is because there's been a breakdown of dialogue and a lack of tolerance or pluralism. This is something very close to my heart, and I've decided that this should be a core component of ADR International. We reject Samuel Huntington's philosophy and thesis of a clash of civilizations. We embrace His Highness the Aga Khan's philosophy of a clash of ignorances. This department will aim to work with international NGOs, government organizations, to help create and address the lack of dialogue and to promote pluralism. As timing is tight this evening, I'll briefly mention peer mediation. Working with children and helping them see dialogue as a means to resolve conflict is essential in helping generations to have new life skills. will be creating a centre of excellence in peer mediation to bring the best talent and better peer mediation programs that reduce violence, improve behaviour, and help children as they grow into adults. We also have international partners, and I'm delighted to announce tonight that our relationships with the University of Nicosia through Dr. Anna Plevri, who's here today, the Kenya School of Law, Charles Owoma, the Lebanese Mediation Arbitration Centre, Mona Hanna, and the National University of Juridical Sciences in Kolkata. In coming weeks, we'll also be announcing our corporate partners within the UK. That really sums up what I wanted to share with you. But before I leave you, I just want to say a little about the two speakers that you're going to be hearing from today. Peter and Alan were both trained by me a couple of years ago. And what struck me through their training courses, because they didn't really need to have the mediation training, they were phenomenal peacemakers in themselves, but they embraced the process in such a way that it became an example to people on that course. And I'm really delighted that you accepted our invitation. So thank you very much.
Well, the first of our speakers tonight is Lord Peter Hayne. Lord Peter Hayne was the Member of Parliament for Neath from 1991 through to 2015. He now sits in the House of Lords. He's had numerous ministerial positions, including Secretary of State for Wales and Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. He spent 2 years as Leader of the House of Commons and Lord Privy Seal, a lifelong human rights campaigner and a prolific mediator. He's speaking to us tonight on the subject of dialogue, mediation and conflict resolution.
Nikki, thank you very much, and thanks to Charlotte for hosting us here this evening, and to Rahim for inviting me. Rahim, as he mentioned, trained me. He wasn't too bad as a trainer, I think. In fact, he was brilliant, and I'm delighted to be joining him in this exciting venture. Mind you, I'm not sure that I come highly recommended, because when I was Secretary of State for Northern Ireland negotiating the end to the conflict, which we did in 2007, in a radical Catholic area of Belfast, there was graffiti up saying, "Hayne is insane." In a radical Protestant area of Belfast, there was graffiti up saying, "Sinn Hayne." It took me back a few decades before, when I was involved in the anti-apartheid struggle, stopping whites-only South African rugby and cricket tours and so on, when the editor of the Sunday Express said, "It would be a mercy for humanity if this unpleasant little creep were to fall into a sewage tank up to his ankles head first." So I'm not quite sure why I've been invited here this evening, but having through Rahim entered the world of mediation, I think there's a real read across to my experience of conflict resolution across the world. We take for granted, for example, that Northern Ireland is now more at peace with itself than ever before, after a conflict originating centuries ago, sharpened by terrorism, violence, hate and prejudice. It was as deep and bitter a conflict as anywhere in the world. And that makes the achievement of the 2007 settlement all the more remarkable. We didn't convince everybody, by the way. We had to train those mural artists. I don't know if any of you have been to Belfast, but you see on the side of walls those big garish sectarian murals. And we had to train them to replace them with peaceful murals. And this one particular mural artist refused. And we went back to him. And he said in the end, he said, "Look, it's not that I don't want to help, just that I'm not a very good artist. I can't do faces, I only do balaclavas." Resolving the conflict in the end only became possible when both the British government and the IRA realized that neither could win militarily. It's rather like deadlock in a commercial or a family dispute. Nobody's actually going to win by continuing to fight. It took leadership, the willingness to move beyond what hardened, embittered followers or voters were often comfortable with and used to. It took considerable courage. Government ministers, for example, willing to talk to terrorists, people who'd bombed Birmingham and Manchester and London, let alone what they'd done in Northern Ireland and in the Republic. Some terrible things. Being willing to talk to them, risking damnation in the media and by those who fundamentally disagreed, including many of the victims. It took courage on the part of Republican leaders like Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness, that they would be willing to negotiate with the British enemy, risking splits in their own organisation. And it took courage by unionist leaders in the end, particularly in Paisley, the most radical and extreme of the leaders involved, to be willing to share power with people he denounced as terrorists only a short while before and had never talked to in his life. And all these pressures are actually present in any conflict. And you need to start by creating space and time free from violence in which political capacity can develop. You need to build trust by being non-partisan, like mediators, cannot be seen to be taking sides, or you are doomed to failure from the beginning. You have to be impartial, or perhaps neutral is a better word, and you have to get close to people. I, for example, discovered by chance that the former IRA commander and now Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland was an England cricket fan. Do you believe that? Somebody who hated the British state actually could recite the England players and all their different characteristics off by heart. He was a fanatical England fan. You get close to people, you find out points of common interest and common humanity. You've got to be prepared to have inclusive dialogue at every level, wherever there's a negotiable objective. You've got to be able to take risks, be prepared to take risks, to sustain that dialogue and to underpin the political process that's often very fragile. For example, we as a Labour government under Tony Blair released political prisoners as part of the settlement, an indispensable part of that settlement, who'd committed terrible atrocities, barbaric murders, and they walked free under the Good Friday Agreement, to the anguish, as you can understand, of the victims. Some of them, that these people had actually murdered loved ones, and yet they accepted that in the end. So it was very, very difficult. Another risk that I took as Secretary of State was I realized that this thing, there's sometimes a particular time frame in a conflict that unless people seize the moment, it may never come around again, or at least for a very long time. And I thought there were a different constellation of forces coming together the end of 2006, early 2007, which was one of those moments. If we didn't get it, it could disappear, if not forever, then for a long time. And so I resolved to introduce water charges into Northern Ireland. Now, we pay water charges in Wales and England and Scotland for that matter, and their property and water charge taxes were double what they were in the rest of Britain, were double what they were in Northern Ireland. So I introduced water charges. Actually, there's a rationale for it because it needed investment. This created absolute uproar. And the whole of the population turned on me, which is exactly what I wanted them to do. And I said to them, the solution to this is get rid of me and get your own elected politicians in government, and then you can get them to abolish the water charges, which is what duly happened. But it was risky. You need to avoid or resolve preconditions to dialogue. Very, very important. Avoid any preconditions if you can possibly help it. Because, as those of you who are in the world of mediation know, people get to hate each other. And they all want to make preconditions about sitting in the same room or all of these things. You've got to try and avoid preconditions if you want to get dialogue on the road, and this we constantly tried to do. You've got to resolve grievances, for example, that are not necessarily central to the peace process, but actually are underpinning it, For example, in Northern Ireland, equal access to education and to jobs for not just Protestants, who'd always had those, but Catholics as well. You take those grievances away, and it creates more space for politics to flower and for extremes to melt to one side. You have to be prepared to think laterally. On the very evening before we were due to see something some of you may remember, that historic photo beamed around the world of Gerry Adams, the Republican leader, sitting alongside Ian Paisley, his bitter enemy, joining together in this peace process, it nearly broke down. Not because there wasn't agreement, but because Ian Paisley would not sit on the same side of the table as Gerry Adams. Gerry Adams wanted to sit on the same side of the table as Ian Paisley. We wanted them to be together, because otherwise, what would be the symbol of that settlement having matured? So what we did overnight is we constructed a triangular table in which, and you might not have noticed this if you remember that picture, there they were, Ian Paisley on that side, Gerry Adams on that side. Both their principles were satisfied, because for Ian Paisley, he wasn't sitting on the same side of the table. But for Gerry Adams, he was as damn close as he could be, as if he had been. And from our point of view, the picture was the two of them, signifying this breakthrough. So you have to be prepared to think laterally, and from what I've studied and observed of mediation, that often happens as well. You're not necessarily sure what it will be when you start the mediation, but actually it is important to always keep that opportunity. And even a quick glance at this checklist of key principles throws up some obvious points for contemporary conflicts dominating the world. For example, on Israel-Palestine, the conflict has not been gripped at a sufficiently high level as it was under Tony Blair. Almost every day of every week of the 10 years he was in power, he gripped the Northern Ireland conflict. So you see, for example, fly in, out diplomacy from American Secretaries of State, usually immediately after a new presidency and a fresh initiative, and then the closer you get to the next presidential election and a second term, that sort of expires. You cannot sustain a proper process that way. You have to maintain it constantly. Also, preconditions have been and are now a complete block to negotiating progress on both sides, on the part of the Israeli government and on the part of Hamas. But in the end, they can't defeat each other militarily. They're going to have to resolve this dispute by a negotiated solution which satisfies Palestinian aspirations for an independent, democratic, viable state, and Israel's need for security as a state. On the conflict that is now dominating our television screens every day, so mercilessly, so horrifically, Syria. This is a disaster of biblical proportions, as almost every one of the fundamental principles of mediation and conflict resolution have been ignored or shouldered aside. If you remember, shortly after Assad crushed peaceful protesters as they arrived in Syria after the Arab Spring, he crushed them mercilessly when they were peaceful, and the problem erupted. Our Prime Minister went out, and I make no party point, our Prime Minister went out and said, Assad must go. That was the demand. This barbarian must go, and it was almost said in fact it was said in those terms. Finally, last year we came around to, well, he should only go after 6 months. Now, this is like a mediator stating in advance what the outcome must be. And those of you who are professional mediators know that that's absolutely destined to fail. This is just not learning the fundamental principles that we put into practice in Northern Ireland. You cannot prejudge the outcome. You cannot be a partisan figure. Assad was backed by up to 40% of the population. He was never going to go, just like that. By, barnstorming headline grabbing demands like that. He was never going to go. He had Russia and Iran standing behind him. They were not going to let him just go like that. The West initially demanded the exclusion of regimes. The Assad regime, Russia and Iran, all of them are key players. Again, futile. It's like a mediator in a commercial dispute, because the finance director has maybe done some questionable things in the eyes of the mediator, reading up on the case beforehand. But no, he doesn't or she doesn't want the finance director there. Only the CEOs can be there. I mean, this is just undermining the elementary principles of mediation. That's what's been going on. And the West has backed one side, including Saudi Arabia, and then tried to mediate. No wonder it's a complete catastrophe at terrible cost to the people of Syria, to the surrounding regions, and to ourselves as the European Union, with the massive influx of desperate refugees. So, the inescapable lesson for me is that such conflicts will never be resolved militarily. Either side may have temporary advances, as you're seeing to and fro in Syria at the present time. But the solution in the end has to be political, and the mechanism has to be negotiation, and the principles of those negotiations are very similar to the principles of mediation. So I very much look forward to working with Raheem. I think he's a fantastic leader in this field, very charismatic, very, very professional, very visionary, and all the colleagues that you brought together, Raheem, on this exciting venture, and I hope you'll join in too. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for particularly the insight into the difficulties when you're trying to be in dialogue, whether mediation or negotiation, where people's values are different and people hold on to values and the different, and obviously the important tensions that they bring. So thank you. Well, our next speaker, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce him, is Sir Alan Ward. And I trained with Sir Alan doing my mediation as well. And everything that Raheem said about him actually is true, although I think he'll joke to the contrary. Sir Alan was made Queen's Counsel in 1984. He became a High Court judge some 4 years later. In 1985, he was appointed a Lord Justice of Appeal. His judgments are often quoted, and his wit is rarely surpassed. He's known to us currently for all his tireless work as chairman of the Civil Mediation Council, and tonight he's going to share his views of the future of mediation.
Thank you, Nicky. May not be entirely true, but thank you all the same. Following Peter Hain is, of course, a daunting task. To follow is a well-known duty of the junior barrister, choosing, if he's brave enough, to follow his leader in submissions to the Court of Appeal or the House of Lords. On one occasion, I, as leading counsel, had been smashed around mercilessly by Lord Templeman, Sidney Templeman, affectionately known as Sid Vicious for no good reason, who at one stage said to me, "Mr. Ward, you're not in the Hammersmith Brent Tribunal now." I knew him faintly. We used to walk across Waterloo Bridge together, and Lord Mackay was there grinning benignly at me. I took a deep breath, gave a big smile and said, "I know, my lord, there they listen to me with respect." Sidney was so angry. He was breaking his pencils and hurling them across the committee room, and Lord Ackner was ducking and diving, so that when I sat down at the end of it, and Lord Keith of King Kell said to my junior, "Mr. Rawls, do you follow?" Peter bowed so low, his wig nearly fell off his head, and he said, "Not without a helmet, my lords." I feel rather like that this evening. But it is a unique pleasure to be able to address you and to congratulate Raheem on this brave and interesting initiative. I applaud it, and we all wish him huge success. It's not just the initiative to promote and encourage mediation, which is a brilliant endeavor by itself, but to embrace the idea of poetry being helpful. On the day we met to discuss this, I happened on my way home to hear on the music program a lady who promotes music, and she said that she finds that choral singing in refugee camps has an amazing effect on the children. As one young child said to her, if they sing with you, they're not likely to beat you. A really damning indictment. But not only poetry, please, Rahim, get some choral scholars going as well. Rahim is, as you've been told, this great enthusiast for and teacher of mediation. But there are obstacles to his progress. Sadly, the culture of dispute resolution is still immersed, is it not, in the belief that there is only one forum that can provide justice. It's only the court that can settle who was right. And litigation invariably results from a feeling that my rights have been invaded, and I protest, I want justice from an impartial figure, the judge. And the defendant thinks, this complaint is such a load of rubbish, I am offended by it, I demand my rights, I want to be vindicated, the judge will do it. And they are hell-bent on litigation. But as you know, and as a moment's reflection should convince you, both sides cannot win. One will lose, the other may win, but not entirely. There is no such thing, I say, after a life of 60 years in litigation, as a humdinging certain winner. The proof of that in the statistics of the Court of Appeal show how many appeals succeed. You've convinced the judge below, but you haven't convinced us, and occasionally there's an appeal to us, and the Supreme Court perversely get the decision wrong and reverse us. So there is no certain winner. That ought to be common sense, but sadly it isn't. And given the cost of litigation and the time involved in litigation, it is astonishing that it remains the first avenue, the way of resolving the dispute. How much more sensible to engage in mediation? Surely the only war that is really worth winning is the war against, to succeed in bringing about a peaceful solution. Peter Hain and I, as I revealed to him earlier this evening, both grew up in Pretoria, South Africa. He's a baby. He's, I don't know, 12 years or more younger than I am. But we lived through the same tempestuous times, in his case more seriously than I did. But I venture to think that we share a common saint in Nelson Mandela. And Nelson Mandela, that man incarcerated for 27 years in a prison cell barely wider than this table, nonetheless managed to speak to President de Klerk. Because, as he said, if you want to make peace with your enemy, you have to talk to your enemy. When you talk to your enemy, you become a partner with your enemy in the discussion under review. And as partners, you strive to find a solution that will satisfy both of you. If it was good enough for him, it ought to be good enough for us. So you may want to know, in answer to the question, what is the future for mediation? Does it really work? And if common sense hasn't supplied the answer to you, then the statistics surely do. CEDA have been collecting the results of mediations for some years, and they published their recent results earlier this year. They showed that there are something like 10,500 mediations that they were tracing and considering. Not many, but in a year that's at least something. But their statistics showed that 86% of those cases settled. 67 at the time of the mediation, 19% within a short time thereafter. So that proves it works. But at what? Sorry, I'm clicking this machine.
And now I'm not entirely sorry.
We'll leave it off.
I'm supposed to be extolling the virtues of online dispute resolution. And you see why I hate it. I will try again. CEDA has not only tried to work out how many, but at what cost. And this, for me, is the startling figure that emerges. By 1990, considering the cases from 1990, the savings in management time, legal costs, and sheer waste of effort are calculated to be £22.6 billion, and the cost of paying the mediators to make that saving a mere 26.5 million. So you're paying 26.5 million to save 22 billion. It sounds like good economy to try it, does it not? In Europe, you get exactly the same sort of results. 9% of mediations would have to fail, it is being discovered across Europe, before there's any demonstrable failure in the process. And for America, which has been at the vanguard of civil mediation, the American Arbitration Association conducted a study with Cornell University in trying to analyze among their top FTSE companies, as they're not quite FTSE there, which of them are dispute-wise, that is to say, which companies embrace mediation as the first avenue for resolving a dispute. And their conclusions are that 28% of the companies who were, or the most dispute-wise companies, were 28% higher in terms of their price index ratios on the stock market than the least dispute-wise. And it shows, therefore, that economically the companies are saving money by embracing mediation. There is, of course, a superabundance of judicial approval of mediation. All of the heads of division speak warmly of it, from Lord Neuberger, who calls it a twin to litigation. Lord Dyson, recently retired Master of the Rolls, speaks of it as being plainly in the public interest. James Mumby in the family division agrees that it is a well-established part of every lawyer's practice. So there's no doubting the judicial acceptance of it. The latest member of the court to promote mediation is Lord Justice Briggs. Now, I don't think this should go outside this room, and you are all on Chatham House terms not to breathe a word of this fact outside whenever Lord Justice Briggs' name is mentioned. But poor Lord Justice Briggs, you know, doesn't get breakfast if he doesn't support mediation, because his wife is one of the top commercial mediators in the country. So he has to say what a good thing it is, and in his latest judgment he has emphasized that a refusal to mediate could bring about the condign punishment of an order for costs being made against you. As he says, the parties now have a duty to promote ADR as well as the court. And the courts need to follow it because they are on the point of breakdown. There is, I'm afraid, more work than the judges can properly handle. There are a paucity of judges because with the new pension rules, the fat cats at the bar are simply not applying to become judges, and the system is close to breakdown. The perfect storm is brewing. So what can the government do to assist in this dilemma? They pretend to be in favor of ADR and mediation in particular, but sadly, I, as chairman of CMC, encounter great difficulty in tying down the relevant minister. I mean, they change often enough as it is. Their officials change even more frequently, and I don't really find anybody who is particularly prepared to carry the banner of mediation through the legislative process. At the moment, there is a great reform of civil procedure. We have the online court proposed by Lord Justice Briggs, but that deals with claims under £25,000, and it doesn't deal with the rest of litigation, which is the subject of review by the court service at this moment. To get the proper part to be played in mediation within those rules is a challenge that I, as the chairman of CMC, have to take up with the minister, and I hope soon to be able to do so. But it is a challenge for us in the community world to be able to speak with one voice about issues, burning issues, like should mediation be made compulsory? What do we mean by compulsory mediation? Do we mean the MIAMs, the mediation information and assessment meetings that take place in the family division? Do we mean merely a stay of civil proceedings while the parties are encouraged to mediate? Do we mean compulsory mediation before you begin proceedings or afterwards, and if so, when? So we have to be able to make up our own view about that burning issue. In Italy, they made mediation compulsory because the law's delays there were astonishing, cases taking 10, 14, 15 years to get through the courts. Mediation being made compulsory reduced the workload dramatically. And of course, the lawyers were up in arms. Their livelihood had been taken away. And so there was litigation, and the regulations had to be set aside by the Supreme Court in Italy as having been passed without the necessary consultation or the necessary procedural requirements. So back to litigation, the delays increased, the costs increased, and eventually the compulsory mediation people did get the order into a proper legal form, and so in Italy The statistics again show just how effective that has been. You must mediate, but you can opt out of it and show good reason why you want to do so. I think the second obstacle for us in the mediating world is to be able to offer a proper system to the government for dealing with mediations if they are to become more widely embraced by the judiciary and being sent off by the judiciary to mediation. Who is going to mediate? At what cost is that mediation to be conducted? Remember the flood of litigants in person that block the court, who don't know the procedures, who don't know even what mediation is. It might be a form of meditation for all they know. And there is huge public ignorance about the process. But are we going to offer a pro bono service? The attempts at one stage to offer that, certainly for the Court of Appeal, came to naught. The National Mediation Helpline has been dissolved, and there is no real procedure in place to cope with the demand that we feel ought to flow from a change in the rules. And that's a challenge for us. What more can the government do? Well, why not make mediation a first step in clinical negligence? The National Health Service is inundated with claims, has huge damages to pay, but has huge legal expenses. And if you ask doctors why, all enlightened doctors will tell you because they are hamstrung by the insurers, who will not allow a word to be said to the family if there is a hint of a claim, for fear that they make an admission which will be held against them. And again, they will tell you, if only we could sit down with the patient or his family or the bereaved and explain what went wrong, why it went wrong, that it wasn't necessarily our fault, it was unfortunate but not our fault, or if it was our fault, we promise you we will ensure that it never happens again. And for a multitude of families, all they want to hear is sorry, all they want to hear is great-grandfather didn't die in vain, and that can be obtained by a roundtable meeting. Why isn't it done? I've no idea. Landlord and tenant is a fruitful supply for mediation. I went to a conference in Paris, it's now possibly 2 years ago, of an organization called GEM, which is the European meeting for judges, retired judges, ministers of justice. And it was a very high-powered conference in the Cour de Cassation in Paris, at which memorably the president of the Dutch Supreme Court said that he was a criminal lawyer. That was his area of practice, that was his speciality, that's what he knew all about. And he wanted to tell us about restorative justice, which, as you may know, endeavors to put the perpetrator of crime in touch with the victim in order to confront each other, with the remarkable results that very often the villain, invariably a young drug addict with innumerable previous convictions and probably many spells in prison, is beating up an old lady or burgling the house to feed the drug habit, without any realization of the impact that that has on the life of those whose privacy he has invaded. Now in Holland, if they feel this process has a prospect of working, they defer the sentence until they have carried through that form of mediation. And if it is thought to be successful, they do not impose a custodial sentence, which would otherwise be well deserved. the result is twofold. One, the prison population has dropped dramatically, and two, the rate of recidivism has dropped dramatically. I thought it was an astonishing presentation. And I was aghast within days of coming back from that conference to read that the Minister of Justice, the enlightened Mr. Christopher Grayling, was proposing spending £8 billion on building 3 more high security prisons to lock up these poor kids in their cells for 23 hours out of 24 with no tuition, no exercise, no nothing, educated perhaps only in how to become bigger and better criminals when they were released. And it does seem utterly futile, and why not give that form of mediation a proper go? It's worth a try. Daily Mail won't like it, but never mind. I once gave a super injunction, you know those things that withhold the name of the parties. And Stephen Glover wrote that Lord Justice Ward undoubtedly is a highly intelligent judge, but he's thoroughly amoral. And I'm insisting that that be written on my tombstone. What can big business do? Introduce mediation agreements so that any commercial dispute has to go through the process of negotiation, roundtable meetings, mediation, arbitration. An awful lot can be done that way and is being done, and that accounts for some of the top commercial mediation that shows no sign of let-off. Educate the lawyers, because there is still a large perception that ADR is an acronym for accepting diminished responsibility, remuneration. Online mediation, well, it's going to come. Briggs has already got it earmarked for the online court. As I've demonstrated, it fills me with absolute terror. I can't use my laptop without my 8-year-old grandson by my side to tell me what to do. And if I tried to do it in our home in Suffolk, I'd probably never get a sufficient connection with 0.5 megabytes to get the thing to the court. So I think there might be modest difficulties in its way, but it does work. You speak to men like Graham Ross of Modria, who helped eBay resolve their disputes, and it is astonishing that online resolution can work and does work. Other problems, Brexit. God knows what's going to happen after Brexit. If my Lord wishes to expand his great practice, perhaps he will offer himself as a mediator in that debark. It's going to be a shambles where we have directives that will disappear once we leave the Union, but the treaties will remain in force. So fortunately, it's 7:01, and I needn't spend any more time on Brexit. We've got to have a growing public awareness that mediation works. We've got, as my Lord Briggs said in his speech recently to the ADR committee, we've got to come to a point in our culture of dispute resolution where we drop the A from ADR. It has got to become the first port of call for the resolution of a dispute, not the alternative. It is not some fanciful form of alternative medicine practiced by the witch doctors that Peter Hain and I grew up with. So, ladies and gentlemen, does it have a future? I've absolutely no doubt it does. Quite what that future holds will take shape over a short space of time. But continue the good work, Congratulations to Rahim for his initiative. Congratulations to BPP School for embracing mediation. I mean, most of the judges have never heard of mediation, still less have they been undergraduates trained in mediation. And here's a whole new generation who don't have to have old fogies like me preaching the gospel. With all the fervour and conviction of the convert, I am now unremittingly an apostle for mediation. I berate the evils of litigation, so God bless mediation and all of you, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sir Aaron. You have this wonderful ability to have serious subjects introduced to us with such a levity and an interest and some humour around them, but we take away the serious points that you make, and we're grateful for them. We now have a very special addition to our evening, which hopefully, thank you for doing that, Ryan. The director for the Centre for Poetry and Conflict Resolution that was mentioned earlier, Shush Ruti, wanted to share in the evening, but she was unable to attend, and she sends her own personal message from India.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Sushruti Tripathi, and I'm the director of the Center for Poetry and Conflict Resolution. My sincere apologies that I will not be able to join all of you this evening in person, but I hope I'm able to convey through this message what CPCR stands for, what we aim to do, and what we are as an organization. But before I get into all of that, I want to talk to you about the power of poetry. I work with underprivileged children through poetry, and with an institution the motto of which is that children everywhere will find their voices and tell their stories. And through the course of my work with these children, I have realized that poetry has often been a tool that they have used very effectively to understand their situations and other people better. And isn't the genesis of all conflict and its resolution in understanding yourself and other stakeholders? I believe that any and every conflict originates in human actions, and these human actions originate in human emotions and feelings. And poetry helps us understand these emotions and reasons much better. So that is the idea that CPCR holds at its core, that art forms help us in individual and collective understanding in a way that promotes both individual and collective healing, thereby becoming an effective tool in conflict resolution. To give you a very small example, a child I was working with was very angry at his father for something, and he just didn't know what to say or how to express his feelings. So we sat down and we wrote a poem. We wrote a poem about how he was feeling, and it began with the line, "I feel," and a blank. And I told him to write down the emotion he feels the most, which was anger. He said, "I feel anger." And then the way I worked the poem with him was to define that emotion through colors and sounds. Anger to me feels like, it looks like, and it sounds like. And as he described what he was feeling, by the end of the exercise, he had a poem and he said, "Ma'am, do you think I could start over again, because I want to change my emotion to sadness?" Because he realized he wasn't really angry at his father for something, but rather sad about something else that had happened in his life, and he was just misplacing the emotion. And I think that is something that each of us, if we understood better about ourselves and were able to understand better about other people in our lives, that would solve a lot of problems before those problems even originate. And poetry being a fluid medium of art, you have different kinds of poetry, you have different ways of writing poetry. It could be an individual task, it could be done in a group, It could be done with different methodologies. Poetry is so fluid, it allows itself to be modeled into a tool to be used in different conflict situations, and that is what CPCR aims to do. It aims to bring together, to bridge the divide, the disjunct between our personal lives, our human emotions, and our professional lives. Because vulnerability, the knowledge of vulnerability, is strength. And because if we knew how we felt, and if everybody in the room knew how they felt and why they felt the way they did, half the conflict would be solved right then. Dialogue would become easier. So CPCR aims to bring art into our lives as a tool for dialogue, for communication, and for conflict resolution. And we seek to do that through various projects, wherein we will work closely with volunteers working in conflict zones with different NGOs and organizations and international organizations. We shall train them in how to use poetry and other art forms as a tool in the areas where they work. We also look forward to training mediators and other professionals in using this in the commercial and professional spheres of their lives. We hope to work with poetry and school children, bringing in the skill set that one learns through mediation and other ADR techniques, along with the understanding developed through poetry to help resolve peer conflicts in school within the children themselves. So CPCR hopes to be able to lay a foundation where we are able to bridge the disjunct between our personal and professional lives at an individual level, and also at the level of different communities and the world as a whole. CPCR, the Center for Poetry and Conflict Resolution, is a step towards building a future where we aren't scared of being human anymore, but we use it as a strength. And I hope you will all be there to support us in whatever way you can. And that CPCR would indeed be something that you would like to be associated with. And on that note, I hope you've had a really good evening. And I shall now take your leave. Really looking forward to meeting a lot of you in person and getting good work out into the world. Thank you. Good evening.
As you will see, that the organization is not just a commercial entity, but we have a social conscience driven by many activities, dialogue and pluralism, and the Center for Poetry and Conflict Resolution. Shushwati has written a poem especially for tonight, which is being delivered to you by her directly. It's called Ink, if I can get it to work.
Ink. We write because the fireworks on our fingertips are not meant to light up cafes in Bangladesh or cities in Syria. Because words are powerful, and poems don't recognize borders or race or religion or color. Because black or white or brown, yellow, rainbow, in the end we all bleed red. Hate does not discriminate. So love shouldn't either. We write to touch the soul, our own and others, bleeding ink for our world. So the world bleeds a little less red. Because we believe in words and dialogues, not conflicts and bullets. We write. I choose ink.
So on that note, if any of you want to join and communicate, listen to our poems, receive our poems on a weekly basis, engage with us on a mediation, arbitration, negotiation capacity, we'd love to talk to you. Much of the team are here this evening, so please come and see us. But I also want to say a final thank you to Kelly Thornton, who's sitting here broadcasting live on YouTube. She's been the one when you've been getting your RSVPs and things sorted out. And also a published poet, so you'll be receiving some poetry from her too. But thank you for all your work, Kelly. And I'm going to give it back to Nikki, but thank you everyone.
Well, I think you'd agree it's been a marvellously enriching evening on so many different levels, and thoroughly enjoyable, even when you're hosting. Thoroughly enjoyable. It's been a complete delight. And so really all that's left for me to do now is to thank our speakers, to thank everyone for coming here tonight, to thank everyone online who's joining us from around the world. and invite you to now come and have some drinks with Rahim and the speakers, and to celebrate the launch of ADR, ODR International, and to toast its future success. Thank you.